So the consumer goods conglomerate Unilever has a new CEO, came in sort of a shock move, and he participated recently in a fireside chat with an analyst from Barclays Bank on the 6th of March. And I want to break down what the new CEO, Fernandez, talked about in this fireside chat. The very notable, at least to me, absence of any discussion about retail media or digital transformation, and what he did talk about instead and what that might mean for retailers with their own retail media network and competing consumer products brands. Let's break down what he said, what he didn't say, and what that all might mean in the context of retail media. Good morning and welcome to the Retail Media Breakfast Club. I'm your host, Kiri Masters, and every weekday at 6 a.m. Eastern, I bring you candid and real discussions in the world of retail media and marketplaces in just 10 minutes. So bring your own cup of coffee and we'll get smarter about retail media together. Right, so the first observation that I had about this discussion is that there was literally no mention at all about retail media, digital transformation, or e-commerce to a large degree. He did talk a little bit about quick commerce in emerging markets, but that was it. And this strikes me as unusual because a lot of CEO speeches and investor calls over the last few years have at least some reference to e-commerce channels, e-commerce growth, the importance of e-commerce and digital in modern consumer engagement. And that, has been the case at Unilever and its peer companies like P&G, Nestle, PepsiCo consistently are highlighting e-commerce and, whether that's D2C or online marketplaces. But Fernandez didn't mention it at all. So that is interesting in and of itself. I think we could take that two ways. One is that it's just table stakes. It's obvious when he's talking about marketing spend. Of course, that's going to include retail media, and we're sort of past the hype cycle of retail media insofar as we don't need to mention it by name. It's just an implicit part of marketing spend. That is, I guess, one explanation. And then the obvious is that, what he does talk about, which I'll get into, is going to flow through to retail media in some different ways. Even still, I think that not mentioning these in a pretty major first interview as CEO still does seem unusual, even to give him the benefit of the doubt there. Moving on, so let's talk now about what Fernandez mentioned about marketing investment, and this was pretty huge to me. One of the most striking revelations is a dramatic planned increase in brand and marketing investment. Unilever calls this metric BMI, brand and marketing investment. And the company has moved from what Fernandez calls a non-competitive amount spent on brand and marketing. In 2022, it was 13.1% of sales. That rose to 14.3% of sales in 2023, and projections for late 2024 of it reaching 15.9%. So over the last couple of years, marketing spend has risen pretty handily, but Fernandez didn't mince words about the previous spending level, saying that it was non-competitive. And I think even his words was something like it was criminal. Wow. So he wants to be in the range of 15 to 16%, which is, I think that this is definitely on the higher end from what I've seen so far. I do have a source of data that seems compelling here, which is the software company Keen Decision Systems had a 2024 marketing insight report that broke down at different company sizes what is the typical marketing spend as a percentage of revenue. And according to Keen's research, very interesting. So it broke down by company size, what is the marketing spend as a percentage of revenue. At the 1 billion plus mark, this enterprise range, the average is 9%. And then it gets pretty progressively higher as you go down to mid-market and more startup size companies. At the startup size under 50 million, marketing as a percentage of revenue is 42%. So I won't go through all the numbers on the podcast. That's impossible to track all of these data points, but pretty interesting range there. Even within that, Unilever is shooting 50% higher than that enterprise average. All right, moving along. A key cornerstone of Fernandez's plans is to tap into influencer marketing in a big way. There's a lot of discussion about how this is going to be used in an international context, where he talks about there being, in Brazil, there are 5,764 municipalities. I want an influencer in each of them. In some, I want 100. So he really talks about moving away from mass market advertising to what he calls marketing activity systems in which others can speak for your brand at scale. So he's talking about recruiting influencers, tapping into authenticity, having brand messages come from someone who is one of you rather than a big corporate entity. He talks about younger generations finding traditional corporate messaging suspicious. So this is all very interesting. What does this have to do with retail media? I think that it's a signal of where things are heading in a general sense with creative, and the fact that now with generative AI tools and a lot of the capabilities that we have within retail media now, we can have a lot more personalized messaging when it comes to advertising. Unilever can now enact strategies that have more personalized creative, talking to you as a consumer and what your interests might be and what your sort of demographic and psychographic profile might be, rather than running a TV ad that's designed for everyone, every race, every interest. That is just, he doesn't see that as being effective going forward. So I think that we're going to see this influencer model trickle down into retail media activations. And finally, he talks a lot about cost leadership and cutting costs, and about making their procurement function really robust, about capital expenses in the right places, and really he talks a lot about stabilizing the costs of materials for the products coming in. So what does that have to do with retail media? I think he's looking to keep the cost of manufacturing really low and increase marketing expenses at the same time. So this is where those cost savings are going to be funneled into marketing. But from all the discussion about cost leadership, and keeping in mind that Fernandez was previously the CFO, so this is his language, right? I think that focus on accountability of costs is going to come into play on the advertising side. So Fernandez talks about a methodology that they use called UBS, which is a system for measuring marketing investments specifically, and that marketing investments must deliver higher returns versus any alternative allocation of funds. So this, to me, with a lot of the research that we've seen about the incremental value of retail media versus other advertising channels, retail media is a clear winner here in terms of the potential for better reach, better engagement, better sort of ROI across the board. So I think that this, without saying that retail media is going to be a beneficiary, I think we can assume if Unilever has a robust media buying practice in place, that we're going to see more money flow into highly transparent and high ROI channels like retail media. What does this all mean for retailers with retail media networks? First of all, I think this big focus on cost and transparency and maximizing their investment means that the big players that have really robust measurement, transparency, and standards are going to win those dollars. Players like Amazon, Walmart, Kroger, with a big focus in this area, they're going to win those dollars. I've spoken a lot about transparency in retail media and how a lot of the typically smaller and newer players don't have the transparency that brands are looking for. And I think that those retail media networks may start losing the business of big spenders like Unilever if they can't deliver on the metrics that these advertisers are looking for and the whole package needs to be very transparent, very self-directed. PepsiCo has recently come out and talked about they're not going to be spending money where they can't do it in a self-directed way. I think the direction that Fernandez is going down with Unilever is going to move in the same way. So that's one big implication for retail media networks. What does it mean for other consumer brands? Well, there is so much to dig into here. I think if you're following my logic that retail media is going to be a beneficiary of this increased marketing spend from Unilever and its desire to have much more legible results, I think we're going to see a lot more money flowing into retail media from Unilever, and that might actually impact other competitors in the space. Another very interesting point he made was they want to be premium across 50% of their product portfolio, as in premium brands, premium positioning. That was quite interesting, just as an aside, with the context of like this global macroeconomic uncertainty and slowdown, is that while a lot of brands are moving towards keeping their unit prices low for consumers, maybe for people trading down, or maybe reducing pack sizes so that the unit price remains the same, etc. Unilever is kind of going in the opposite direction with this premiumization approach. It's so counterintuitive, but I think this creates an opportunity for competitors. Are you going to directly compete in that premium space, or are you going to reinforce a value proposition for price-sensitive segments? So that's another opportunity there. And finally, looking closely at this influencer model, and is this something that you also need to get in on? I think it's very interesting to me that this CEO coming in is taking such a strong position on a very specific marketing tactic. And what do you think that means for the industry as a whole? These influencers are going to be sending traffic somewhere, right? Is that to a TikTok shop? Is that to a D2C site? Is that to marketplaces? We don't know yet, but something to stay really close to and watch closely to see how it ends up being implemented. So the bottom line here, Fernandez's omission of retail media from his investor discussion doesn't mean it's unimportant. Rather, it's more likely that it's become table stakes in Unilever's marketing mix. The real transformation lies in how these platforms will need to adapt to Unilever's new social-first, influencer-driven, and ROI-focused approach. Well, that is it for today. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Retail Media Breakfast Club. We meet here every day at 6 a.m. Eastern. So be sure to subscribe and get your daily dose of insights, trends, and hot takes in the world of retail media and marketplaces.